Welcome to the second week with Sewing Hub. And before we start a new topic, I would like to make a short recap of what we learned last week. So first of all, we learned the difference between the sewing machine and a serger. Also, we learned the difference between woven and knitted fabric. Woven fabric, as you remember, is made from two yarns, one vertical, another horizontal. And if you pull one yarn, the rest will stay the same. While knitted fabric is made from one yarn which interloops with each other. So if you break yarn anywhere, you'll end up having a hole in your sweater. Also, last week we talked about imperial system and we practiced doing some measurements with a ruler. And especially in today's lesson, it will be very necessary to work with ruler and hope you had enough practice at home so you remembered how to do it. After a short recap, let's finally start a new topic of today's class. Today we'll focus our attention on seam allowances. I will give you some theoretical introduction, after which we will be sewing together. And of course, I want to explain you what are notches, why we use it in sewing, and what's the function of it. And finally, I want to practice some backtacks with you. Let's talk about seam allowance. So seam allowance is a amount added to the pattern edge to allow a garment to be sewn together. So if I look on this shirt as an example, you can see that all these lines, it's called seam. It's where pattern pieces were attached. Let's say this is sleeve, right? And the sleeve was attached here to body. And this is armhole seam. If I turn wrong side out, I would see that a little bit like extra fabric. This is seam allowance. So basically seam allowance width can vary depending upon where it is located on the garment. And the most important thing, it has to match. So let's say if I attach sleeve to body, I have to make sure that seam allowance is the same for body and for sleeve, right? And there are certain measurements, and the most important thing that depends on the company and the garment, the measurements can differ. I will show you a little bit later the table, which I will be referring for my classes. But also I want to show you, let's say, if we take a look on the side seam, this is side seam. To attach front, because this is front of the shirt, and this is back of the shirt. If I want to attach them, I have this seam allowance, right? And this is the seam. So basically, again, seam allowance is the distance from edge to the seam. And again, depending on the area, this amount can differ. If I take a look, for example, at the shoulder seam, right? This is my shoulder line. And I can notice that this seam is shorter than armhole seam. So let's take a look at the table. Like in our classes, I will refer to the mass production measurements. And usually for side seam, it is 1/2 inch. For center back and center front, it's 1/2 inch. For waist seam, it will be 3/8. For zipper, it's 1 inch. It's for normal zipper. For invisible zipper, it's 1/2 inch. And for hem, it's 1.5 inches. I prepared a quarter scale skirt for you to understand how seam allowances work. So I have 2 back pieces and 1 front piece. And if I attach them together, I will have a skirt, right? But to attach them, I have to sew the seam allowances. If you remember, I said that side seam is 1/2 inch. So how does it work? I take my ruler, and as you remember, if this is 1 inch, distance from here to here is 1/2 inch. So I mark 1/2 inch here, I mark 1/2 inch here, and I draw a line. And as you see here, I have a curve, right? So I mark half inch, and usually along with the normal ruler, like any fashion designer will have a curved ruler as well. Like the people who work with patterns, they have the curved ruler. It's called French ruler or French curve. It helps to make the curve smooth. All right. And yes, here I have my half inch, which means if I want to attach front to the back, I will align these two pieces together correctly, and then I would start here and sew from this point till the end. And this is how I attach two pieces, and this distance will be seam allowance. The same will happen with another side seam. And if say I had a waistband which is attached to the waistline, I would do the same. I would measure 3/8, as you remember. So if this is 1 inch, okay, so if this is, let me put this way, distance from here to here is 1 inch, from here to here is half inch, but if I need 3/8, it means that 1, 2, 3. So this small line is 3/8. So 3/8 here, 3/8 here, 3/8. And I take my curved ruler and attach those points. So this is seam allowance for my waist, and this is seam allowance for side seam. We spoke about seam allowances. Now let's speak about notches. Notches are very important in sewing because it helps a sewer to understand where pattern piece has to align together. Because let's say if you have a long dress and sitting in front of the sewing machine, you don't really understand like where the pattern piece has to match. And in this case, while you sew, you would see a small marks like this. Well, usually it's not like you don't draw it with a pen or like with a pencil. Instead, you clip the fabric. So you will see a small like cuts in the fabric that allows you to understand where fabric, like where the garment pieces has to match. Okay, so in my case, I prepared like the quarter scale, and I already mentioned couple notches, because ideally, as I said, it has to look like a cut. And let's say if it was a cut like this, and I would be sewing this piece to this piece, I will start here, I will be sewing, and here I see the notch, right? And if both notches match, excellent, you do a great job. In case if they don't match, let's say you're sewing it and you see that one notch is above, another one is below, it means that something is wrong, that you didn't match the pieces correctly. That's why it's very important to have notches, especially if you have like very long pattern pieces, or if it's like a very complicated design. All right, so let's talk about 5 purposes why we have notches and why do we why, like in which cases we draw notches or we cut the fabric. Okay, so first case is to indicate seam allowance. Let's say if I want to attach back to the front, or like back, or like front to the back, I drew a notch here and notch here. It means that this distance from here to here is seam allowance. it means that if I will be sewing these pieces together, because sometimes it's easier to just have a notch, because it helps you understand how much to sew. So I know that this is the seam that I have to sew, so they will be attached like this. Okay, second reason is to match one pattern piece to another. Let's say I want to sew back to back, right? No, actually, let's say this way. I want to sew, let's go back to the front and back and front. And like this length is like, it's very long. And when you will be sewing, it's very possible that you start to sew here, but once you end the skirt, it can happen that one is above another. And in order to escape this outcome, somewhere in the middle would make a notch. It will help us to understand if we did correctly till this distance. So once we sew from here to here, if these two lines match, it means that everything is correct. Then from here till here, if everything matches, then it means it's correct. So it means that the length of the pattern piece will match in the end. So the second reason is to mark width of darts, tucks, pleats, and ease. I will talk a little bit more about this after we speak about notches, like after we talk about this. But to give you like a slight understanding, so this is the dart. Usually in any, like, it's a silhouette detail. It helps to make to let clothes to follow the shape of body. And whenever we have dart, we also have notch, because it helps us to understand where dart is sewn. I will talk about specifically about darts. I will talk in third class, so don't worry about this right now. Just think about notches, like we have notches when we have darts. So the fourth reason is to indicate the end of zipper. If I take two back pieces, so this is one, this is second, and it will look like this, I know that my zipper will end here. Like, I have to know it. And so first what I do, I take my zipper, I measure with ruler how long it is, and then once I know the length of zipper, let's say it's 8 inches, then I take my pattern piece and I marked here and I put here notch. And I put notch on both pattern pieces because I have to know where it matches, right? So I would know that zipper will end here, and then from this notch till down I can sew my back patterns. Okay, the next reason is to indicate center front, center back, like waistline, hip level, and so on. Like on the example of the skirt, I can say that, let's say on the front, I have a notch here in the middle. It means that I know where is the center of my front skirt. It really helps, especially when you do sewing, when you put all pieces together, because on quarter scale everything looks tiny and it's easy to understand where everything matches. But when you have a full scale, a huge skirt, like pieces, it's harder, and that's why this is when you should start to put notches and make your process, like sewing process, easier. Remember I spoke about different details that we use to change the silhouette of the garment. I want to show you some examples of my previous works. And this is skirt with darts. You can see front darts. Like darts help us to make the area narrower. So thanks to this, the waist is narrower than the area which is in the hips line. And also I have darts at the back. The next example is tucks. So instead of having a dart, I have several tucks for these pants. The technique of doing tucks is similar to darts, but they end result is a little bit different because with tucks I still have the fabric. It gives me extra room for flexibility. And the third example are pleats. Pleats are very often used for skirts or for dresses. It's a very hard work to make pleats, but the end result is very nice. I think all you have seen pleated skirts and dresses. Now let's do the sewing. So for exercise, today we will do backtacks and we will sew seam allowances. But before we start, I want you to prepare some pieces of fabric on which you will be practicing. Okay, so I have like a random piece of fabric. If you have like any piece of fabric that you don't need, like use it in this purpose, just to use for some practicing. All right, so what I do first, I make sure that this edge is straight. So I will cut it. Right, I'll take the fabric scissors. And let's say my length is about 8.5 inches. So it's 8.5 inches. And the width would be, let's say, 3 inches. 3. So, and if you have noticed, I doubled the fabric because I want to have 2 pieces for every exercise. All right, so here I will draw a line because I will cut it here. Now I will measure 3 and another 3. Altogether, I need 3 pairs of pieces. After you cut your pieces, we will draw a seam allowance. It will help us to during the sewing process. I will start with the 1/2 inch, then I will draw seam allowance for 3/8 and then for 1/4. But before I do it, I want to do a quick reminder. I want to remind you what is 1/2 inch, what is 3/8, and what is 1/4. As you remember, distance, let me do this way. So the distance from here to here is 1 inch, but we need to find 1/2 inch. So distance from here to here is 1/2 inch. It's right in the middle between 0 and 1. Now I need to find 3/8. 3/8 is, if you see the square, 1 square is 1/8, but we need 3 of them. So I count 1, 2, 3. Here is 3/8. This is 1/2. 1/4 is in between from here to 1/2. You can see this line. This is 1/4. Or in other words, 1/4 is 2 squares. So 1, 2, it will be 1/4. So we will be using these 3 measurements: 1/2 inch, 3/8, and 1/4. before we start sewing, I want to explain what is a backtack, because I want you to practice doing backtacks for this exercise. And from now till on, I want you to do backtack whenever you do your stitch. So what is backtack? Another way, it's also called backstitch. So like whenever you see backstitch, it's backtack, and the other way around. So backtack is stitching reverse for a short distance at the beginning and ending of a seam line to secure stitches. So in other words, if I want to explain you on drawing, let's say I want to attach these two pieces together. What I would do is, once I start my stitch line from this end, so this is the beginning, I will go, let's say 2-3 stitches front, 1 2 3. Then I would go the same amount back, 1 2 3, and I will continue going front. So I would stitch until I hit the end, then I would go again 2 or 3 stitches back, 1 2 3, and then front. This way I would secure beginning and ending of my seam line. Here I finished my 3 samples, 1/2 inch, 3/8, and 1/4. I did backtack at the beginning and backtack at the end. This way it will never rip apart and it's very secure. Do the same for 3/8, backtack at the beginning, backtack at the end, and for 1/4. Backtack at the beginning, then you sew along the line, and backtack at the end. Thank you for joining me in today's class. Now you know how to sew seam allowances, what are notches, and how to do backtack. If you have any questions, I will see you on Wednesday at 1 p.m. on Facebook. And if you have any questions, not just from the class, but about the sewing, you're very welcome to join me every Wednesday on Facebook. I run a live video at 1 p.m. So have a great week, enjoy the rest of the day, and see you soon.